Welcome back to the ChicoBag Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Keller, and this is your place to get inspired and make the world a better place. And today I'm joined with Garrison Harward. He's the Executive Director of Andando, a nonprofit working alongside rural communities in Senegal to alleviate poverty through a whole village approach. Think water, health, education, agriculture, literacy, and small business. And it's built through long-term partnerships and local ownership. Andando's work, it's concrete. 41 market gardens producing over 2 million pounds of food, 16 health clinics serving more than 50,000 people, 21 schools reaching over 8,000 students, and 2,700 plus microloans supporting farmers and entrepreneurs. And now a big milestone, we're celebrating over 100,000 trees planted, strengthening food systems, restoring land, and building long-term resilience in partner communities. So this isn't short-term aid, it's generational change built with communities, not for them. So Garrison, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks so much, Andy. So happy to be here.
So I love the term generational change.
Yeah.
You know, you hear the term like generational wealth, and that's so important. Some people are in a situation where it's just really hard to get out of where they're at, right? And so
Yeah.
you're setting up just a whole wealth of ecosystem. I don't even know what you call it. So you call it the whole village strategy, right? So
Yeah.
tell me a little bit more about what that means in real terms.
Yeah, for sure. I think you have it right. When you're looking at creating a generational shift, it's going to be more than just one project, because the things that are holding people back and that are keeping people stuck in their current situations, it might be, 3 or 4 different pretty big base elements of their financial security, of their food security, their medical security. And a lot of projects come in and are well-meaning and they do great work. But if they're there only on a temporary basis and they're only working in one domain, and there isn't sort of an overall plan to deal with the other elements, then a lot of times those interventions just don't make any fundamental changes. So you'll see a lot of development funds going to countries all over the world, well-meaning programs, well-thought-out programs. But if there's a gap, if there's still a remaining need that isn't met, a lot of times people don't advance.
So what are with the whole village? It's water, health, education, agriculture, literacy, small business, right? Those are the pillars that you're operating within. And so what you're saying is if one of those or a couple of those are missing, the whole thing isn't sustainable.
Yeah, pretty much. So, I mean, for example, we often start with water. It's a pretty foundational need for folks. If you don't have clean water, if you're spending most of your day just getting water, you really don't have very many opportunities to do much else in your life. But once you have water, that might mean, okay, great. You have water. Now you have free time. But if you don't have anybody who's providing any access to capital, for example, you're not going to fundamentally be able to change your economic situation. If you don't have space or a fenced location or a solar pump to be able to get that water onto the ground for irrigation, then you're not likely to be able to change your food security situation. You're not really able to start your own garden or improve your field crops in the rainy season without that economic stimulus and the ability to purchase your inputs when you might want to purchase them, or have your own equipment so that you don't have to borrow from neighbors and start your season late. And then if you have all of that, if there aren't any schools in the area, then your children aren't likely to be able to pursue a different set of choices than were available to you. So you look at a lot of areas. Parents are well-meaning. Parents want to send their kids to school. They'll sacrifice a tremendous amount of their own cash flow in order to be able to send their kids really far to places where they can get educated. And those families that are able to do that, maybe they have relatives in the regional capital or in the capital of Dakar, and they can send their kids and they have the means to be able to support them to study from a pretty long distance. Those folks end up advancing, whereas their neighbors who don't have that opportunity, people are still stuck in just subsistence farming, and that's great. There's nothing against farming, but that type of subsistence farming without access to business skills, without access to capital, without access to modern farming techniques or farming equipment is often a really difficult life. And it's what people want to break out of. It's what they want their children to be able to avoid, is having to have that same hard life.
So you talk about, aid versus ownership.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit more about your thinking in that realm.
Yeah, for sure. Um, Aid, I mean, these terms are kind of interchangeable. A lot of people have different definitions. Um, there's a lot of short-term aid. There's emergency aid that has to do with natural disasters or environmental crises, failed harvests. If there's a rainy season where there's really no rain and people have their harvest failed, and that sort of short-term aid, that sort of emergency food supply stuff is really necessary. So that's there's a time and a place for each kind of aid, and that really works in the short term for those emergency situations. But over the long term, if programs are not well designed, if programs are not owned by the people that are using them, and if they're not integrated into local development plans and coordinated with local government, local ministries, all the people that are going to be able to support the success of a program over the long term, then they tend to not succeed. So you can invest a lot of money building a lot of things. People tend to want to build quickly. You could, get funding and put in 100 different wells and put in 100 different gardens and give a bunch of capital for farming equipment. But if that's not put into the ecosystem of support that's needed to maintain it, then over time, it ends up being just a really big short-term economic gain that's going to help some people, and some people are going to be able to take advantage of that and capitalize on it. But a lot of people aren't. A lot of people, you know, people have different skills and people have different abilities to self-organize. And a little boost economically to an area like that is helpful. It's not a waste, but it doesn't tend to fundamentally change things without a lot more thought behind it.
My perception of aid a lot of times is, people that want to do good come in, they fly in, they do something and then they leave. Um, but I think what you're talking about is really involving the people,
Yeah,
that are on the ground, living in the community to create something that's co-created, right? Not just
yeah,
put onto someone, right? So that
yeah.
in your experience, that's what gives it longevity.
Yeah, for sure. Most of our programs have been designed. We didn't originally start with a whole village approach. We didn't go in there and say, this is our perfect idea and this is what we want to bring. And we'd love to just help you in all these different domains. It really just started with a couple of small projects that people were asking us to provide. And from there, it became, hey, this is really great, but we don't have X, Y, and Z. And we don't have another partner who's helping us with that. So could you also do X? And
Yeah.
then we start to figure it out. We start to talk to the proper authorities, see how we can integrate that, and then it becomes one of our programs. And that kind of organic evolution has really been community driven for the past 15 years. And that's what has led to all these different programs. And that's why they fit within the municipal structures and they fit within the local development plans. Because these countries and these places where people are doing development, they have a lot of different people trying to fix these issues. There are tons of well-meaning people. There's tons of good people working in government. There's tons of good people working in NGOs and local NGOs and private business, everything. Um, and it's really easy to look at a chaotic environment like that because it can often be chaotic with a lot of different people trying to do a lot of different things. And to say, well, I don't know how to interact with any of that. So I'm just going to come and bring my solution in and put it kind of on top of everything else without understanding the context of what's going on underneath the surface. So we've tried to be present long enough and to spend a lot more of our time listening than we are really kind of implementing our own ideas
Yeah.
so that we can figure out how do we really fit into everything that's happening? How do we say yes and to everything that's already going on? So we're not going counter, or we're not in competition with anybody else who's working in the same areas. We're not in competition with other NGOs. If we come in and we can bring a water project and somebody else can bring a garden and we don't have to do that part, that's phenomenal. That's really, the best case scenario.
And you said 15 years. Is that how long your organization's been working?
Yeah, we a little bit longer. We've been 15 years pretty much in our current structure in
Mhm.
what we've been doing. But we originally we were founded by a family in Oregon, the Kikers, Kevin and Fiona Kiker, and they had a personal relationship with Senegal, and they started building relationships and visiting people's families out in their villages. And from there, you start to see needs and you start to think, well, we have a little bit of means. We have means to access fundraising capabilities in America. So what can we do? And so they started doing small projects. But it's been about 15 years since we've been an official 501c3 and doing this assortment of all sorts of different interventions.
So, I mean, you've done a lot in 15 years, 41 market gardens producing 2 million pounds of food. I mean, that's
Yeah.
phenomenal. What have you learned about what makes a garden program succeed long term?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing we've learned is flexibility. These are group projects. And if anybody has ever been in a group project, the dynamics are unique. Every group is different. And what works for one doesn't necessarily work for another. And back to that idea of ownership, if the only way that these gardens succeed, the only way that any of these projects succeed is if people really are taking them and running with them. These are not Andando's projects. We talk about them, for our advertising. Andando has done 41 gardens, but really Andando has partnered with 41 communities that have established gardens. And I like to tell communities, because we come in and people are very thankful. What we're bringing is a level of financial investment that they're not capable of doing at that time. But I like to tell them, by the time you're done, this garden's going to last decades. It could be, we have some gardens that are 15 years old now and still in operation. And what they're going to be able to produce economically, it repays the investment many-fold over. So yeah, I think the most crucial thing is that we treat each garden as a unique situation and we treat each community as a unique community. We have obviously a structure. You can't really implement something without your basic project plan, your basic initial implementation. But after that initial implementation phase, we really let the women take it and make any sort of changes that they want, because it really is their garden. It's their
Yeah.
resource and it's their investment of time and energy. So yeah, looking at the different gardens over the years, we've had some that have decided to pretty much fundamentally change their group structure, their organization, their leadership. They've decided to change how they do savings. Some gardens like to contribute based on a certain percentage of their sales. Some gardens think that, they don't want to necessarily, if you're doing better, they don't want to contribute more because they feel like, well, I shouldn't have to pay more for the garden than somebody else who's not working as hard. Just because I work hard and I have more profit doesn't mean I should have to pay more. And we say, okay, that's fine. We came in initially with that first idea. But if you guys want to take it and you want to have a fixed contribution model so that you have enough money for your pump maintenance and all that, then that's totally fine. So it's really been the local ownership, I think, that's the key, and allowing people to modify things and also being present for long enough that we're able to steward people through these changes without having sort of gaps where people kind of can stumble and fall and then get discouraged.
Now, I know you're talking about, well, I mentioned in the intro about the microloans.
Mhm.
As an entrepreneur myself, I love the idea of, empowering people to start their own businesses. And what kind of projects are notable that you like to talk about as far as the microloans and what's come out of it?
A lot of them are farmers. The
Hmm.
vast majority of our microloan recipients are farmers. And sometimes it's as simple as somebody is able to buy a seeder for the first time. We're talking about a very simple piece of machinery. This is horse drawn with a little spinning seed disc. And it's very basic, very attainable technology. But if you don't have $100 to be able to invest in that, then you are left, I said this before, you're left borrowing from your neighbor or borrowing from your neighbor's neighbor. And you can be the third person down the list who's going to use this communal seeder. And it ends up that you start maybe a month later than everybody else for your field crops. And if that doesn't line up with the rains, then your harvest, you could be literally half as productive as if you
Yeah.
had your own equipment and were able to start when you knew that you should start. So it's really small little nudges, small little changes that allow people to operate in the ways that they know they should, because they have a ton of knowledge about the local environment, the ecology, how to do this kind of farming.
Yeah.
They're really incredible agriculturalists. Um, and so it's been amazing watching people with really modest amounts of capital be able to even double or triple their yields. And that kind of an influence on family food security, on their ability to, get to the next rainy season without running out of food. So they don't have to spend their money then to purchase food, to purchase rice and the basic staples. It really changes a family's life.
It reminds me, I was reading something about a study that some organization did where they gave a loan. Uh, in one version of the loan, it was a scientific study. They
Yeah.
gave it in small portions over time. And then the other scenario, they gave it all at once. And, the mental model that a lot of people have is, oh, if you give, somebody that's poor a bunch of money, they're going to waste it. And this study, you probably know about this, right? It showed that the people that got the money up front actually didn't waste it.
Yeah.
They largely went out and bought capital equipment like a plow or something
Yeah.
that would help them be more productive. Um, hey,
Yeah,
is this,
I think a
is,
large influx is really we found it to be much more beneficial
yeah,
because people can make that one big purchase. They can make that one big life change. Versus if you give it to them over time, that might even be a model where then you would expect people to sort of save and get towards that large purchase and in a Western responsible way, people might think. But the social pressures are pretty extreme in this kind of environment because when you have people who are, predominantly subsistence farmers, um, who are pretty close to the edge financially. They don't have a lot of savings, or in some cases, any savings. You're really, working. This is like the extreme of paycheck to paycheck, living without a paycheck. Um, so folks are interdependent, and you see that village mentality where people will take care of each other, and if there is a need and you have cash on hand, it's socially expected that you're going to contribute. That personal savings and withholding is actually a really difficult thing for people to overcome. And there's a lot of I'm not criticizing that in any way in terms of the culture, but it's a reality of what is difficult financially for people to get beyond their standard level of cash flow to be able to accumulate enough to make a fundamentally different choice or to make a fundamentally larger investment. And it's having the availability to get something that is a loan that people understand is not personal money. They understand it's supposed to be for a certain purpose, and to get it all at once and at that right time before the rainy season, when the inputs are cheaper, when the equipment is available, that's the kind of thing that really makes an impact.
awesome. So tell me a little bit about the health infrastructure. So you're running a bunch of health clinics. Like how do you measure success in that realm?
Yeah, the health
It's
clinics are pretty amazing, actually. So Senegal's health system, I find it to be really impressive. If it's spread over an immensely large area with not a lot of infrastructure, and you've got people that are really trying to make a difference and are really moving the needle on maternal and infant mortality, on vaccination, and all sort of different, malaria and different tropical diseases. And so I think it's really an area where our investment is able to make a huge difference and is able to really capitalize on the good work that's already happening in this area, and the tremendous leadership that exists in Senegal in terms of improving health. So what we do primarily, the first thing that was asked of us is just infrastructure. They said, we have these remote communities that you're starting to partner with, and they don't have anywhere that women can give birth with electricity or running water. And they're far from from other hospitals, from larger health clinics. They have local midwives who are operating, who are helping women to give birth, but they just don't have the basic resources. So you end up with poor outcomes. You end up with higher mortality and higher complications um, than they know how to prevent, really, if they have the resources. So the first thing was just constructing rural health clinics um, that have running water and that are a little bit larger and a little bit more well equipped than what people would typically have in those rural areas. It gets very complicated. There's a whole health structure with different types of interventions and different types of care that are available at each level. And what we're operating at in the most rural areas, they call it a case de santé. which some people call a health hut, which was supposed to be the most basic level of care. It's a place where people can go where there's trained staff, there's some resources, and it's the first intake where then people would be able to be put into the medical system and referred or treated as appropriate. But those systems that were built, a lot of them through USAID and other programs, were really very minimal. They were working one room, a lot of them without running water, a lot of them without electricity. So you're talking about saying, hey, we built you a health clinic, but it's really just a one room shack. And
Yeah.
it's a place where they can do these health services and where they can conduct vaccination days for people, doctors that would come through, but really not adequate. So we started working with the health ministry and saying, okay, this model is okay. You're starting to build the network of infrastructure in rural areas, which is great. But what if our sort of per location costs went up and we could actually provide something that has, a delivery room and a recovery room and private bathrooms in each with showers? And what if we could also have an office and a pharmacy? And would that be, the first conversation was, would that be appropriate? If we were able to build something that was a little bit improved, would that fit culturally? Would that fit within the medical system? And it turned out that everybody was really enthusiastic about it. They said, it wasn't necessarily that we didn't want to have a better facility. It was that this initial program was trying to take a certain limited budget and spread it across too large of an area. And you end up with, a lot of inadequate health huts spread across a large area that are largely not used. So I think the fact that we sort of took our time with it and really didn't come in with a preconceived notion about what that sort of intervention was supposed to be or what the model of a health hut is supposed to be, and said, okay, well, what's the actual need? And then talked with the doctors and talked with the nurses and talked with the midwives and said, well, what do you really need to provide adequate care to the level that you want to? And so that ended up, now we have a facility that probably costs 3 times what it costs to build the small one room huts. But I think we've had 1,000 babies, 1,000 healthy babies born now in our health clinics, which is amazing.
Yeah. So the money actually, the cost per, impact is quite a bit lower, when you think about
Yes.
the volume of people going through a more expensive
Yeah.
clinic. That's pretty cool. So, I mean, what I'm learning here is I think something that, anyone listening to this podcast could apply wherever they're trying to make generational change, is the first thing I'm hearing is listen,
Yeah.
ask questions, don't assume, what you think is right is going to work in some place that you don't fully understand.
Yeah.
So yeah, ask a lot of questions, involve, people,
Yeah.
at the ground level, and think about all the areas of the, I guess, the economy or the environment where, all the needs, starting with water, obviously. So
Yeah.
what else could you add to that to round it out, as far as
Yeah.
leaving listeners with something that they can take forward?
I would say, unfortunately, change takes time.
Mhm.
There's a level of impatience that I think we all have to see things improve in the world. There's a level of eagerness and, um, I guess, impatience to see things get better because it is difficult to look at some of the situations and a lot of times, especially from a Western perspective, it's easy to say, "Hey, that's not that hard." Like we're talking about we just did a borehole well up in northern Senegal, and it's 150 meters deep, so about what is that? About 400 feet, something more than that,
Mhm.
uh, and through mostly sand and a little bit of limestone. And that was something that this community had literally been trying to get for 35 years.
Wow.
35 years they've been wanting to have access to water. They know the water's there. There's a huge aquifer under northern Senegal. Um, and they've been uh, sort of stuck in this situation because they didn't have a basic level of infrastructure that we take for granted. What we drilled is pretty much a single family's investment for a well. I live in Vermont. I live up on a mountainside, and people routinely will drill through solid rock for much deeper just for a single family home. to have a well. So I think it is amazing the sort of simple nature of a lot of the problems that we encounter and how solvable they really are. If there's just, you know, some more money, some more people who are willing to invest and achieve those simple base needs. But the problem is that mindset is sort of, I don't want to say naive. It's the first step. Achieving the infrastructure and implementing the project is in many ways the easiest part of what we do. All of that is, we get bids, we hire contractors, we follow up on the work, we get it installed, we report back on it, and that's it. That's really straightforward. We've done it for years and years and years. The hard part is, how do you do the proper community facilitation ahead of time to make sure that what you're installing really aligns with their needs? And then how do you get people to buy into it? And then how do you keep it maintained over time? Because everything breaks. Everything that we install is going to wear out. And if you can't maintain it over the long term, then what started out as a well-meaning intervention turns into a temporary solution. And then people are back in the same situation, trying to get somebody to reinvest in them, which is often harder than getting the first investment.
Yeah. People want to put in the new well, right? Not fix
Yeah.
the broken one.
Yeah. So I think a key part of our success is also that we stick around. These things take time. They take longer than people think. And the follow-up and the monitoring and evaluation, all of the things that are not so exciting, are really crucial to the process. So as disappointing as it is, a lot of these problems are very solvable, but they also take an incredible level of diligence in the implementation and in the long-term care for these projects.
It's like anything, right?
Yeah.
It's like, yes, the plan and the follow-up and the long-term vision and making sure, you have the durability of your system, right? So that's where the generational change comes in. Will my kids or my kids' kids be able to maintain this thing that I've created?
Yeah.
Without being burdened. So if people want to learn a little bit more about your organization or get involved, where can they go?
Sure. Yeah. Our website is www.andando.org. That's ANDANDO.org. And we've got lots of great resources there. We've got even, documents on our different project plans and all kinds of stuff like that if people are nerdy and want the nitty gritty details. We've also got a great video. We just won an award this past year. We won the .org Impact Award in the Hunger and Poverty category. And as part of that award, they sent a film team to Senegal to film a little mini documentary about us. So that's up on our website now, which is a great sort of little overview, 2-minute overview of what we do. And then we also have a newsletter. You can sign up for that on our website, and a blog. And we're always, we're doing a mix of project overviews and updates on our work, as well as sort of some of this deeper thinking into the development process and how do we make a more sustainable impact over time. And then everything, staff profiles and spotlights and things like that. So it's a lot of fun.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing. I know a lot of people, everyone listening can learn a lot from your experience and the change you're making in the world. And thank you so much for, making an impact.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a great time.